And welcome to the community discussion on the dangers of vaping. I am Michelle Schroyer, a health educator from the Zanesville-Muskingum County Health Department. I want to thank the Muskingum County Library for hosting this event. We have some great speakers tonight to discuss the vaping and tobacco use. Just a reminder, if you do have questions throughout the presentation, please ask them in the comment section, and then we will answer them at the end of the slide or at the end of the presentation. So, to give some background information, the health department works on tobacco prevention. And last year we created the Vaping Tobacco Coalition in response to the vaping epidemic. Studies show 1 out of 4 high school students vape, and additional research shows that 1/3 of teens that start vaping will switch to traditional tobacco products within 6 months. So there's a short video that Amanda's going to show.
Have you guys tried the brain freeze?
No, brain freeze sounds disgusting.
It sounds sour gummy worms.
Oh, I love it. It's so good. You guys have to try it.
What about dragon's blood?
I feel like that'd be like a cherry.
You just missed the tobacco industry's latest scam.
Have you guys tried the brain freeze?
Because you were supposed to.
Disgusting. So good, bro.
Sour gummy worms.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. It's so good. Do you want some?
Sure.
So as the video pointed out, youth can easily buy vaping and e-cigarettes online. And originally, when these products came out onto the market, everyone thought they were approved by the FDA. And additionally, many others think that flavors aren't available since the FDA flavor ban went into effect earlier this year. So now I'd like to introduce Leanne Eyre from the American Cancer Society to share her work with the tobacco and state legislation. How are you, Leanne?
Hi, Michelle. Hi. Sorry about that. It took me a second to get unmuted there. Hi.
Oh, hi. So can you just kind of give us a brief introduction with your role with the American Cancer Society and on tobacco prevention?
Sure. Again, as Michelle mentioned, my name's Leanne Hare, and I'm with the American Cancer Society, and I'm a strategic partnerships manager. And that's, I guess, a fancy title for a lot of the public health work and systems work that the American Cancer Society does to reduce the impact of cancer through cancer prevention and early detection programs, including things that are focused around smoking and tobacco use. We know that tobacco use is the #1 preventable cause of cancer in the world, actually. So we've got a lot of work to do because there's still a lot of people that use it.
Yeah, especially with the vaping going on now, I'm just getting more popular. So most people believe if a product is out on the market, then the FDA has approved it. But can you explain the role with the FDA and the vaping devices?
Sure, and I'm going to be honest with you, it's a little confusing, so just bear with me a little bit. So the FDA has gone on record, and if you look at their website, they'll tell you there's no such thing as safe tobacco products. So the FDA deems certain things as safe and effective for standards of evaluating medical products, or if a medical product is not appropriate. So instead of being able to do this for tobacco, because they know tobacco is not safe, they regulate the tobacco products based on public health standards, and then they consider the product's risk to the population as a whole. And while that to me kind of sounded like an easy out for the FDA, we know that smoking is legal, so it's not safe, but it's still legal to do it. So the FDA actually has the authority to regulate how tobacco products, including vaping and e-cigarettes, are marketed. And it took a while and a couple lawsuits for them to be able to have that kind of regulatory flexibility over these things. But they are able to regulate that, which means that they can set certain standards for marketing and distribution for e-cigarettes and vaping. But one of the most important things that means is that e-cigarettes and vaping cannot be, actually, going back to our earlier conversation, they cannot be marketed as a safe alternative to smoking or as a tool to help people quit smoking.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people thought because it was safer, then it meant it was safe, and that's not the case. So I know you do a lot of work with state legislation. Can you tell us about the work you've done on the tobacco front, especially with this vaping epidemic?
Sure, sure. The American Cancer Society actually has a sister organization, our American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, and they do almost all of our legislative work. So I reached out to them till I knew that I had the most up-to-date information. But some of the things we're working on at the local or at the state level, and then also at the federal level, is again strong FDA action on regulating cigarettes, or excuse me, e-cigarettes and vaping products. The FDA has the authority to regulate them. We want them to regulate them as strongly as possible. So we're working on that all the time. One of the other things that we're working on is prohibiting the sale of the flavored e-cigarettes and vaping products. We know that that's a huge draw, particularly for the youth as we look at this epidemic. And if the flavors go away, oddly enough, they don't taste as great and people probably aren't going to be quite as likely to use them. So it's a little bit of the draw away from them. But then also, and this is, the next two are two things that we think are really, really important that can be really impactful. And the one is including e-cigarette products in our smoke-free legislation. That's particularly in Ohio. We've had our smoke-free Ohio for many, many years now. As of right now, e-cigarettes are exempt from that. That's why you might see somebody using e-cigarettes or vaping in a store or in a restaurant or something like that, because it's not at this point covered under our smoke-free Ohio law. We're working really hard to change that. And then defining e-cigarettes and vaping as actually tobacco products, which means then they can be taxed as tobacco products, which we know is effective, particularly with youth, in keeping them from continuing to use it and preventing them from starting at the beginning because it's much more expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. They can't use their allowance to go and buy it when they're walking home from school. So yeah. And
Exactly.
one last question, because I know you're a mom to a teenage son. What is your advice to parents when they're trying to talk to their teen about vaping and tobacco usage?
Um, that's a really great question. And it is a conversation that I've had and my husband's had with both of my boys. And, a couple of things. First of all, the basic, just because your friends are doing it doesn't mean that you should do it. And we've talked about the fact that once you start using a tobacco product, including vaping or an e-cigarette, and whatever that might be, it's so hard to stop. And so if you don't start, you don't have to stop. We talked to him about the cost of it, but most importantly, the health effects. It's long-term health effects. We don't even know what it's going to look like. We've only seen these products on the market for maybe 15 or 20 years at the very, very most. So we have no idea what that's going to look like. But we do know that there have been some serious side effects for young people with vaping when it comes to things like popcorn lung and other breathing things. And in the midst of a pandemic that affects the way people breathe, it's just an opportunity for us to tell them again, don't start doing these things. Don't put yourself at risk. And I saw that Ben Kennedy was on this call. So if all else fails, we would just turn him into Mr. Kennedy and let him have a talk with both of them about the dangers of vaping. But no, seriously, one of the other things that we've talked about them is the importance of what that can mean academically or in scholastic sports. If you're wanting to do this and you get caught, and I'm not going to steal the thunder from one of our upcoming speakers, but it's something important as a parent that we talk to the kids, that the risks just so far outweigh the reward of vaping and using tobacco.
Absolutely. Well said, Leanne. Thank you so much for talking to us about this. And just remember, for everybody else, if you do have questions for Leanne, post them in the comment section, and then we'll have time at the end to answer those. Thanks, Leanne. So next, Amanda, if you would show the one slide from the, perfect. And as you can see, this is a picture of all the vape pods containing high levels of nicotine. So like one Juul pod is equivalent to the nicotine of 41 cigarettes. One puff bar is actually equivalent to 50 cigarettes. And I do want to note, like the puff bars, these are the disposable vape devices. So teens they're getting their hands on this. It's very easy for them to get a hold of. And then one Soren pod is equivalent to 90 cigarettes of nicotine as well. So next, I'd like to talk to Jessica Stonecipher. Um, she is a teacher from Mideast Career and Technology Centers.
Hi, Michelle.
Hey, Jess, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. So do you mind giving us a brief overview of your job as a teacher?
Absolutely. So I am an agriculture instructor for Mideast Career and Technology Centers, and I'm actually paid to work at Zanesville City Schools as a satellite program. I teach kids in grades 7 through 10.
Perfect. So you've been a teacher for a few years now. Can you tell us how vaping has changed things just with you seeing it as being a teacher?
Yeah, so when I was in school, I've been out of high school for about 15 years. I was used to walking in the bathroom and my fellow classmates smoking, and it was very obvious that that's what they were doing. You know, the smoke was there. Um, but now that we have vaping, it's a lot harder to notice those things. And so teachers and staff members have had to work on identifying things that they can notice when kids are, certain behaviors when they're in a stall and they're just kind of hanging out in there for a while. Even if you don't see smoke, we know that they could be vaping. One of my supervisors at Mideast, I was talking to him today about this, and he said that he knows students are vaping if he walks into the boys' restroom and it smells good. He said that's not normal.
Very good point.
Yeah, and I've also had students vape even in my class, which has been kind of surprising. And, obviously they were caught, but it's so much more discreet than it used to be. And so it's a lot harder to catch when students are doing that. The other thing that's concerning, just in general, but also at school, is that students can be vaping with THC. And so there's other consequences to that, and the ways that kids show up at school and are able to concentrate, that can make it challenging. And I really think that kids, this has already come up, but kids think that, and well, the general public believes that vaping is safer. And so it's a lot easier for them to get their hands on things, even from parents or young adults, because they think, oh, I'm giving this young person something that is safer than a cigarette. And, we know that it leads to smoking cigarettes later on for many young people. So those are the things that have popped up for us at school.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
more challenging to notice.
And have you noticed it affecting like certain programs at the school because of their vaping?
Yeah, so there's a few, I came up with 3 things that I noticed, and it's not, well, one, athletics is the obvious one. We all think about kids and participating in athletics, and of course, vaping and tobacco use affect their breathing and general development as students. And so if they're caught, then they spend time out of school, they spend time out of practice, and therefore they spend time out of games, which is not fun for kids because they really enjoy their sports. Academic success is a big one too. So we know that vaping negatively impacts brain development. And so when kids are involved in vaping, then it's harder for them to focus at school. And with them being addicted to those items, when they're trying to learn or we're trying to teach them, I can just imagine a student thinking more about the tobacco product than they are about what we're learning in school.
Absolutely.
And then finally, punishment. I already talked about this. When they're caught vaping, they're punished. And when kids are out of school, there's all kinds of consequences, not just for sports, but for they're away from their peers, they're away from a safe place. At Zanesville, they're fed breakfast and lunch. So for kids that are food insecure, they lose that. And then it also impacts their teammates and people that are in their clubs and their teachers. We miss them. So all kinds of things that result from vaping in schools.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're missing out on that social connection when they're not in those groups and stuff. Absolutely. So have there been certain changes at your school that they've had to make due to vaping?
Yes. So one thing that is across the board, more bathroom monitoring. We trust kids less with going to the bathroom. I had an incident in my class where I think girls were just, what they said is they were passing cosmetic products, which is not good. But you know how, young women do that, and
Yeah.
that's a helpful thing, developmentally. And I thought it could have been a vape pen. And so it turned into this conversation. The reason why I got upset with you is because I thought you might be vaping, and that's not good for you. And let's talk about that.
Yeah.
More bathroom monitoring. THC testing. So I know Mideast has test kits now on hand
Oh,
at school. If
well,
they,
that's great.
yeah, if they think there might be THC involved in their vaping, then they do test for that. There is drug testing at Zanesville for all students that are in athletics, and
Okay.
so that I don't know if that tests for tobacco, but it would definitely test for THC. So there'd be consequences for kids who test positive for something. And then the other thing that's come up is vape detectors in the bathrooms. Now, as far as I know, Zanesville and Mideast have not purchased these. They're very expensive. And
Yeah.
it really upsets me that this is something that we have to be talking about, because with public schools, funding is tight. And the tobacco companies have really pushed us to think that we need to spend this money on these detectors where we could be spending them elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. That is very good point. And just one last question, if you don't mind. I know you're a mom, so do you have any advice to parents that you'd like to say to them if they're trying to talk to their teen about vaping?
Sure. So my son is 6, but I've been around a lot of
Pretty
teens.
young.
And so I do not have a lot of experience parenting young adults and
Mhm.
youth, but what I do think is it's important for parents to tell their kids that it's dangerous. Remind them that vaping leads to cigarette use. I think a lot of students don't recognize that.
Yeah.
That this is, can kind of be a slippery slope. It could lead to that.
Mhm.
Um, Help them to see that their future is more important than looking cool to their friends. And I don't say that in like just saying it like that, but you need to
Mhm.
look at the tangible things that are important to those kids, personal goals, career goals, athletic goals, etc., and make it really tangible for them, so that they can resist for a reason, and that when they tell
Mhm.
their friends no, it's for a reason. And then I also think building support for students, just like a support system of not just you, but coaches and staff members at school and after school programs, where they're hearing these things from more than just a parent. And
Yeah.
lastly, I think I really respect this young generation because they get social justice. They understand why it's important. And this is a social justice
Mhm.
issue. And if you help them understand that this is the tobacco company coming after the most vulnerable folks in our population, including young
Mhm.
people, people with less means, people of color, LGBT folks, then they're more, I think, prone to be resistant
Yes.
overall, because they get that this is fraud. They're being told that something is cool when really they're being caught for life in this tobacco use, you know, movement. It's been going on for so long, that they can just say no now for these reasons that they already believe in, which is social justice. So I try to get my students from that angle because they get it.
Absolutely. And I think it's great that you're talking to your students about vaping because, like you said, having that connection with them hearing it from somebody else besides their parents is really important. And then also, like, for parents, if they try to talk to them, like if they see somebody vaping or they see it on TV, bringing up the conversation that way also kind of is better than just trying to go to your kid's room and just start talking to them about vaping. So,
Mhm.
yeah, you brought up some very great points, Jessica. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So next we have Jack Hare from Tri-Valley High School. He is captain of his soccer team. Are you there, Jack?
Yes, hi.
Hi, Jack. How are you doing?
Doing well.
Thank you for being here. So you are a senior, is that correct?
That's correct.
Perfect. So since you're a captain of your soccer team, I just have a few questions for you. Has participating in sports impacted your decision not to vape?
Absolutely. I mean, it's unwise for anyone to vape, but for athletes who rely on healthy cardiovascular systems, it's especially detrimental to vape.
Yes, very true. And are the rules and punishment if found vaping clear to all athletes?
Yes, we're given a packet before a season begins, and in that packet, it contains the consequences if you're caught vaping. And even
Mhm.
in addition to that, coaches clearly state the punishments as well. Now, that doesn't stop everyone, but it stops most.
Okay, thank you. And then, as a leader on your sports team, what advice would you give peers and younger athletes about vaping?
Associate yourself with the right people. I mean, there are those in cliques that will vape, but there are others that don't. So be wise with who you spend your time with outside of athletics and school, because that will determine whether or not you vape oftentimes.
Absolutely, very good advice. Thank you, Jack. So next we have Madison, Autumn, and Alexa. And I know Alexa has to leave early. Are you there, Alexa?
I'm Autumn.
Hi, Autumn. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
Good. So what grade are you in?
I'm also a senior.
Senior, perfect. So how do you view vaping in your school?
Really, to be honest, the people that I hang around, none of us really do that because, like Jack said, with who you associate with, you're more likely to not vape if you're hanging around people that aren't vaping. But for me, the biggest thing in my school that's changed is we did get the vape detectors that were brought up earlier. But when that happened, there became this underground, you could hear people in the hallways talking about it. And our vice principal told us, he said, even if you aren't the one doing it, if you're in the bathroom and it goes off, you could be in trouble too. So that creates a whole, like, I'm afraid to go to the bathroom at school because I'm not doing it, but I don't want to be blamed for something that somebody else is doing. So it's really made me more aware of my surroundings and aware of the kind of people that I'm associating myself with, just to make sure that I don't get blamed for something that I'm not doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that makes it more difficult for the ones that aren't vaping. I hope you don't mind me asking this, but have you ever tried vaping before?
No, for me, there have been people in my family that used to smoke and have
Mhm.
gotten very sick from it. So having the kind of external factor of that it never really appealed to me.
Yeah, that's how, I mean, obviously when I was in high school, vaping wasn't a thing, but for me, my grandfather had emphysema and stuff. He was quite the heavy smoker, so that's what deterred me from not smoking. What's it like for you to see your friends and classmates vape?
Honestly, it's really weird because this wasn't like a thing when we first started high school. Like 4 years ago, when we started high school, nobody was really vaping. No, that wasn't a thing because it was really new. And then I came back for sophomore year, and all of a sudden, there were people getting caught in the bathrooms and people getting caught in classes. And every year, it's become more and more of an issue. And every single year, you meet someone, and you're like, I never would have thought that person would be vaping, and they are. Like people that you thought like they're rule followers A to Z, but for some reason they ended up vaping.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, a lot of people don't think the addiction happens very quickly, but with the amount of nicotine that's in the vape devices, I mean, the addiction can occur quite quickly. So what do you think is the appeal with vaping with the youth?
I think a lot of it is maybe the flavoring, but also I think a big part of it is that peer pressure is very prominent in public schools. And even if it's not something where people are telling you to try things or telling you what to do, there is a certain amount of pressure that people feel because they want to fit in or be cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel like any of your classmates or teens that you know are concerned with the health consequences with them vaping, or do you think they just don't really care?
I don't think it's either they don't care to a level that it's just not on their radar. They forget that it's even a thing because they don't care so much, or they genuinely don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have advice to fellow classmates or to other youth that may be coming into the high school about vaping?
I think it was said earlier, if you never start, you won't have to stop. So it's easier just to not start at all.
Absolutely. And do you have any advice to parents that are wanting to talk to their kids about vaping?
I think that it's important to be honest and express concern and express that you don't want them doing that. But also at the same time, you need to understand that at some point, some teenagers do go down the wrong path, but you need to offer a safe way for them to come to you and say, hey, look, I need help, instead of them being afraid of what you'll do.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Thank you so much, Autumn, for being here. And if you wouldn't mind staying on, just in case there are questions at the end for you.
I actually was the one that emailed you. I do have an NHS meeting
Oh,
starting.
I'm sorry. I thought
You're
that,
okay.
I apologize. So you are good to go then, Autumn.
I'm sorry about that. Have a great night.
You too. Is Madison?
Yeah, I'm Madison. Hi.
Okay, perfect. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. And what grade are you in?
I'm a sophomore, 10th grade.
Okay, perfect. And are you involved in sports at high school?
No, but I used to be
Mhm.
in middle school, like my last year of middle school.
Okay.
And vaping was a big issue then too.
And did you notice it impacting the sports team that you were on?
Personally, all the girls in any of the sports teams that I've been on, volleyball, basketball, and even my archery,
Mhm.
everyone on the team has been pretty good. I don't think that any of the, bad eggs have been involved in those, but a lot of my personal, like, really close friends have been involved. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. So what is it like seeing your friends and classmates vape?
Well, it's honestly shocking at first, but to a point it just gets numbing. Like, the people that I've grew up with, I've been around ever since I was second grade, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
They just completely turned down a different path. Second we got to high school, they're involved in so many bad groups, they're doing bad things, and I've really just had to break away, and it hurts. It really does.
Mm-hmm.
Just see the people you've loved so much just fall down the wrong hole.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're doing the right thing by not vaping, even though I know right now it seems very difficult to be doing that. Um, and do you feel like the ones that you know that used to that were your friends that are vaping now, are they concerned with the health consequences or?
The people at my school
Mhm.
hasn't taken it very seriously. I go to West Muskingum High School.
Okay.
We don't have any of the vape detectors, nothing like that.
Mhm.
And the people there just aren't concerned about it. My friends even, they don't care about their bodies and they look at it as more as like a joke. Like, and it's
Mhm.
obviously not a joking matter. Like, this
Right.
stuff results in death. It's very serious. And I'm really worried about them. But no matter how many times I've tried to sit down and be like, you don't understand what you're doing to your body. If you're not going to look into it, I am. Like, it's horrible.
Yeah,
No
and I
one's
think
showing
it's
any concern.
Yeah, and I think it's important for when people are researching about the vaping to be going on credible websites and not like on the vape company websites, because of course they're going to try to advertise it as being safe. But if you do the research like on CDC or the Surgeon General, then that's more of your credible information. So do you feel like it's been more of appeal because of the flavors or more because of the peer pressure like the other ones have said?
Well, I feel like it's a mix of both. Like,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of my friends that do vape, my past friends, they have said that they would never even consider trying tobacco, like chewing tobacco or smoking cigarettes because of the flavor. I think that the gummy bear, sweet stuff, that's
Mm-hmm.
really been appealing to them. And also the peer pressure. I myself personally have been offered, vape devices several times. And to a point, I'm just fed up. Like, I can't believe how many people have asked. And they ask, it's such a casual thing. Like, oh, do you need to borrow a pencil? Like, they've asked, like, it's just shocking to me how people don't view this as a concern.
Yeah, and I think maybe some of the issues because, I mean, some teens have noticed effects right away, but other ones, they don't notice the effects. So they, with them not feeling sick, they don't feel like they're doing any harm to their bodies. So yeah, well, I really appreciate you answering the questions, Madison. And if you wouldn't mind staying on towards the end, just in case there are some questions for you in the comments.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alexa, are you on? Okay, so I am going to move forward. So I've heard many tobacco users say that they've switched to vaping or started vaping because it's safer than smoking cigarettes. But safer doesn't necessarily mean safe. Remember that none of the devices that we've talked about have been approved by the FDA yet. So next we have nurse practitioner Judine Leroy to discuss the impacts of vaping on your health.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I always get
How are
nervous with
you?
technology. Very good.
Good.
Good
So do you
evening.
good evening, Judine. So do you mind giving us just like a brief introduction to like your history with the medical field and everything?
Okay, so I worked as a nurse for many years and then became a nurse practitioner. I have opened my own family practice as of the last 2 years. So I've been seeing more and more teenagers come through and I've
Mhm.
talked about, obviously different issues, safety issues, vaping, things like that. Um, so that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Perfect. So you've heard like the teens and Jessica, who's a teacher, talk about vaping. What's your thoughts on vaping?
Oh, pretty much the same thing. The attitudes that I hear is that vaping is safe, which I completely disagree with. I tell them that that is not safe. It's just another form of smoking, and there's still the same effects, and we still don't know all the long-term effects of vaping in particular, especially with the teenagers.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I think you kind of already said this, but have you actually had patients that say they quit smoking, but they now vape because it's healthier for them?
I hear that a lot, actually, and they feel like it's a safer form. They even talk the funny thing, with it that I'll share is that most of them will say that they actually cough a lot more. So I'm like so
Really?
I, of course, tease them about, guess what it's doing to your lungs? So I do talk to them about that and try to educate them, because I'm surprised at how many adults' attitudes are that
Mhm.
it's safer. So therefore, I feel like it almost transpires down to the teenagers that they think, well, if they think it's safe, then I think it's safe as well, and it's not going to cause any damage, which is not true. I think as the research continues to roll out, we're going to see how unsafe it is, and probably even more unsafe than it is with cigarettes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think unfortunately some people they feel like, well, there's not tar in the vape devices, so that's not going to affect their lungs. But I think they sometimes don't realize there's those chemicals that do cause cancer that is in those vape devices. Um, so
Absolutely.
we're still studying the health effects, like you said, of vaping, but can you kind of describe like the health effects of nicotine to teens with their brains and because their brains are still developing?
Absolutely. And actually, their brains aren't fully developed until about the age of 25. So you'll probably hear the adage a lot. By the time you're 25, you'll be amazed how much you change. But it's very true. The
Hmm.
big thing with it is that their brains are still developing. Nicotine during this critical period can disrupt the formation of brain circuits that control attention, can affect learning, and make them more susceptible to addiction. And then on to cigarettes, which is not what we want them to do. They're also uniquely at risk for long-term effects, which they don't think about because of being so young. They think they can turn it on and turn it off, which is not as easy as once they're addicted, they find that that's just not the case. Other
Yeah.
things that it can affect is through the limbic system, which is part of the brain, they can develop mood disorders that they don't think about. Um, and
Hmm.
impulse control sometimes can kind of play a role into that as well. So it
Absolutely.
definitely affects brain development.
Yes. And how do you treat tobacco usage in your office?
I actually bring it up to everybody, young, small, kids on up. I see
Mhm.
ages 3 and up, which I know a 3-year-old's not gonna be vaping, at least I hope not. Um, but the teenagers, I definitely talk about it, with their parents in the room. A lot of times they're not gonna be real forthright, but I go ahead and take the opportunity just to discuss the effects in general. That way, even
Mhm.
if they are and it's not being brought out in the office, at least it's kind of some seeds and food for thought. So,
Perfect. And you said you have your own practice. Are you accepting new patients?
I am, absolutely.
Perfect. Awesome. And your practice is located on Sunrise?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Sunrise Center, yes.
Awesome. And then do you promote cessation resources such as the Ohio Tobacco Quit line and My Life, My Quit?
Absolutely, I do there too. I talk about that and how easy it is and the good resources that are available for the parents as well as the adolescent, and how it's kind of more real time. So it's not like the old dry eye video or anything it's actually really easy to watch. They have some amazing resources on there. So I do give them that information. I talk to them about the CDC, as well
Mhm.
as another one. It's fightflavored-ecigs.org. So there's some other things. So we just kind of attach a sheet and give it to them
Oh,
and
that's
highly
perfect.
encourage that if they know or somebody, one of their friends, these are resources to help them.
Oh, great. And the nice thing about My Life, My Quit is they had teens involved when they developed the program. So that way it's more friendlier to them when they start using the program and stuff. So
I completely agree with that, because it's their peers talking to them, not an adult telling them how bad that is for them.
absolutely, yes. Well, thank you so much for being here, Judine.
Thank
If you
you.
wouldn't mind staying on at the end just in case there are some questions.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. So next we have some speakers from the Genesis Pulmonary Center. We'll start with Andrew. How are you doing, Andrew?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. So do you mind giving us just like an introduction of your job at Genesis?
Yeah, so I'm a licensed social worker. I work alongside the Lung Nurse Navigators, Rob and Courtney, who are also here on the call tonight. And
Mhm.
basically, we do and what I do is, we go around to our patients who come to the hospital who have breathing issues, COPD, things like that, and
Mhm.
we connect them with resources, whether that be getting durable medical equipment like oxygen or you like nebulizers or rescue inhalers, things like that. We do that. And then kind of more what I do, like if there's any kind of social determinants of health, whether that be transportation or Medicaid resources, things like that, I try to link our patients with that.
Perfect. Well, that sounds great. So, many teens, like we've been talking about, they think vaping isn't harmful and nicotine addiction isn't a big deal. But can you tell us how nicotine addiction is related to other addictions?
Yeah, absolutely. So, interesting enough, before I worked here in the past, I worked in drug and alcohol. And I think one big thing people don't realize about nicotine is, when you talk about drugs, it's interesting that tobacco kind of gets its like own classification. It doesn't necessarily get considered as like a hard drug, but if you actually look at the health effects, nicotine passes through the blood-brain barrier uh, a lot easier than some other drugs do. And the thing to remember, I think, about tobacco use, especially with vaping, when I was in the drug and alcohol field, a lot of times our people who would get hooked on the more potent drugs, your heroin, your crack cocaine, things like that. It started very innocent. They might have been prescribed, opiate medication because of an injury, and then somewhere along the line, they realized that their habit of trying to support that or get it on the street was too expensive. So, you go to something that's going to last longer and it's cheaper, like heroin. And if you look at vaping and cigarettes, the average vape, like if you would go into a gas station today and buy like a starter kit for a vape, you're probably going to pay somewhere in the neighborhood $25 to $35. And the refills are like $12 to $14. If you get vaping rig or something like that, and you get the juice for like a 5 milliliter vial of that stuff, it's like $15. And eventually, kind of like Madison, the student was saying, a lot of people get into this with the flavors and things like that. At some point, when you become addicted, you don't care about the flavor, you care about the nicotine, because that's really what is getting you to the point where you're addicted, and that's what you need. And it's a lot cheaper to buy bottom shelf cigarettes that cost $4.50. And, you know, it's a relentless cycle. So, you know, when you're 14, 15, 16, you might start vaping and think it's not a big deal. But, you know, 10 years later, when you're 25, you might be smoking a pack or two a day of cigarettes.
Yes, absolutely. And like you mentioned, there is that connection with the other addictions. So we mentioned earlier how tobacco companies market to teens. Have you seen a correlation with your social work between socioeconomic status and them using tobacco products?
Yeah, absolutely. If you actually go and, you know, this is readily available to anyone. If you go to the CDC's website, they have a lot of valuable information about socioeconomic status and how it relates to tobacco use. And what you see the most, especially among teens and young adults, is those who are at or below the poverty line actually account for the majority of smokers in the United States, whether they vape or whether they use traditional cigarettes. So that is something that when companies market to these individuals, they look at that data, they see who their main buyer is and who they should target. A lot of times these are uneducated people, not necessarily, but you will see like where it correlates with the lower socioeconomic status. That also kind of goes along with the education part of it too. But, you know, and I think it's interesting because before I was a social worker, I worked in retail and marketing for a long time. And, you know, when you look at teens, you know, and even when I was younger, we all like to have the cool things, you know, we like to have the iPhone, we like to have a cool car, things like that, things that are kind of flashy. And there's nothing really flashy about a cigarette, but if I've got the, you know, rainbow unicorn gummy, you know, jewel or whatever, you know, and something like that, that nobody has tried yet, that might be something that, you know, appeals to me and appeals to other people. And then that is point one in a long direction of addiction that can go on for a lifetime.
Yes, absolutely. And with you saying the marketing and stuff, I was amazed because we do compliance checks and audit checks at the health department on tobacco retailers. And I was amazed last year because that was the first year I was hired at the health department. When I was doing the compliance checks, we'd go into the tobacco retailers and there was literally a kid and his dad, they were going to be choosing candy, and literally right beside it, there was tobacco products. So they really do try to market to the youth. And
Right.
yeah. Well, thank you for being here, Andrew, and sharing that
Yeah, thank you.
information with us.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome. Are you there, Rob? I think you might be muted, Rob. I'm not sure.
Ah, there we go. Now I have it. Yes.
You're good. How are you tonight?
Very good. How about yourself?
Doing well.
Wonderful.
Do you mind giving us just a brief description of your role at Genesis?
Sure. Courtney and I are both pulmonary care management consultants is our official title, but essentially what we do is we educate our patients who have issues, pulmonary disease, lung disease. We're also tobacco cessation counselors. So we do a lot of education with our people who are current smokers, trying to quit, you know, things like that. And then, you know, we educate, we follow them, kind of help navigate their care, coordinate their care from the inpatient side of things, and then continue to follow and educate the patient after their discharge, with the goal of trying to, you know, teach them how to better and give them the tools to better manage their disease. So that's what we do.
Perfect. That's a very important role. So when you see patients for their various types of lung diseases, have you noticed a link back to tobacco usage or to secondhand smoke exposure?
Absolutely. A lot of the patients that we see in the hospital are some either directly or indirectly related to smoking, heart disease, high blood pressure, kidney disease, obviously lung disease. Those are all directly related to smoking. It's about everything that a lot of these people have, you can trace back to their history of smoking. That's the main offender. So, people that, if they start smoking, early on, the first thing it does is, or vaping, as far as that goes, it has an effect somewhat like adrenaline on the body. It raises the blood pressure, it raises heart rate. It also damages the filter that you naturally have that lives in your airway, called the ciliary tree, that cleans out your lungs, cleans out your airways, and that's where the first effects take place. People will notice things like, I get bronchitis more often. I get bronchitis all the time. Every year I get bronchitis. A lot of people will be told they have asthma early on. In fact, it's not asthma, but what they have is it's just a side effect of that irritation from the smoking on the lungs. So because the ciliary tree is not working like it's supposed to, you get a buildup of extra mucus in your airways, and infections love to grow in that. So folks may have recurrent bronchitis or chronic bronchitis. They early on in their smoking, up through age 40, 50, there. And then eventually the actual physical damage that the smoking does to the lung tissue itself leads to damage to the lungs and emphysema and COPD, things like that. So, but again, it all starts very early on. Some of the earliest signs that you could be developing COPD is that you are more short of breath going up steps, or you have trouble carrying heavy things. You get winded faster, even walking on level ground. Those can be some early signs that you're starting to get into some major, major lung disease.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like you kind of answered my next question a little bit, but are there other symptoms that young adults or teens may be missing that they're not contributing, that it could be from their vape device or because they're smoking cigarettes?
Sure. Definitely you're going to have more of a cough because it's irritating the lungs. The smoke is irritating the lungs, or the vape's irritating the lungs. A lot of times headaches, things that way, because of the effect of the nicotine on the vascular system. People might notice that they have more trouble focusing, because of the distraction, of wanting more nicotine. People have a tendency to be a little more anxious, like with nicotine, and obviously performance on, like, just physically, you get short of breath easier. You're not able to participate in activities like you would normally, want to do, especially as a teen. And then obviously the health effects of that as you get older, as Andrew had said, it starts there, but then the downstream effect is huge.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the issue is with some teens, because some teens don't notice those symptoms at first, so they don't think they're doing any harms to their body, but in reality they are. It just hasn't caught up to that point yet. But
absolutely.
Thank you so much for being here, Rob, and I really appreciate it. I know you're very busy.
No problem. No, it's cool.
So next we have Courtney from Genesis.
Hi.
Hi, Courtney. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. So I believe Rob said you work with him at Genesis.
Yes. So I also work in the pulmonary care manager role. I think Rob did a great job explaining what we do. But I will mention that I just transitioned into this role about 2 months ago. Prior to that, I worked as an acute care nurse at the patient bedside. I worked primarily with patients with a respiratory diagnosis. So that is my background.
Okay. So kind of following up with Rob's question, what is like the typical age range of patients you are seeing with lung disease? And are you seeing more younger individuals with lung damage due to vaping?
Yeah, so in my current role as a pulmonary care manager, we mostly see or care for individuals with a diagnosis of COPD, which is a chronic lung disease. One of the main risk factors, obviously, being smoking. The typical age range of the patients that we see is probably around age 55 to 75. Of course, we do have patients outside of that age range as well. But in my previous role, I provided direct patient care, as I mentioned, to our hospitalized patients, primarily with a respiratory diagnosis. And in that role, I did see patients as young as their 20s that would come in with pneumonitis or inflammation of the lung tissue that required hospitalization for IV steroids to help reduce the inflammation and also for oxygen therapy. I can also recall a patient that was in their 30s. They had a suspected lung injury due to vaping as well. They ended up requiring a ventilator because they were able to breathe on their own. They actually went on to require a tracheostomy tube. And for those of you that are not in the medical field, that procedure includes creating an opening in the neck and placing a tube into the person's windpipe, which allows air to enter the lungs.
Wow.
Unfortunately, the worst part about being the inpatient nurse is you don't get to follow up with the patient or hear about the outcome. So I can't really give you an update as far as long-term effects that individual had, but I can definitely say that I've encountered individuals in that role that had some vaping injuries.
Wow, that is so sad. And I think like when teens hear like other people, like if, because I remember, right, when we were doing our presentations at high schools and stuff, we were telling them about the one teenager that ended up having lung damage and he required a double lung transplant. But when you tell them they're from out of state, they think, oh, that's not going to affect me because it's not close to home. But I think when people hear like this is happening and it's close to home, it kind of, you know, resonates with them more. So have you noticed some of your younger patients that have started vaping ended up switching to traditional cigarettes?
Yes. So unfortunately, I think teens have such a poor understanding of vaping products, as others have mentioned. What they do know is that they're easy to hide. They're easy to use discreetly in public places like school. Easy to hide from their parents because it doesn't leave behind the stench of traditional cigarettes. They come in 5 flavors, but what they don't realize is that there's nicotine in them. And obviously nicotine in any form is highly addictive. And then you pair that with the fact that teens are already more susceptible to addiction than adults because their brains are still developing. I know several studies suggest that vaping nicotine might actually encourage cigarette smoking in adolescence, and that teens who start vaping are almost 3 times more likely to go on to smoke traditional cigarettes than those who do not. Not only that, but the amount of cigarettes that they go on to smoke is usually much higher than that of individuals that smoke without a history of vaping. Professionally, I can say I had an encounter with an individual who was in their early 20s. That individual started vaping as a teen because, in their words, it was the cool thing to do in the group of friends that they had. That individual ended up moving on to vaping products that contain THC, and eventually started smoking traditional cigarettes. At that time of my encounter, they were up to 1 pack per day of traditional cigarettes, in addition to still smoking or vaping products with THC. They didn't have any desire to quit at that point. And I know Judy kind of touched earlier on the mood disorder. That individual's mother actually mentioned that, you know, she had concerns about a mood disorder in that individual. And she thought it directly correlated with their vaping use and cigarette. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, when you have that nicotine addiction going on and their brain is still developing, I mean, it definitely leads to mood swings and impulses and stuff. I mean, it's affecting on many different fronts.
Oh, sure.
Well, thank you for being here, Courtney. If you wouldn't mind staying on just in case there's some questions at the end.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here, Courtney. So next, I'd like to introduce our Smokers Recovery Program, and that is Amanda and Lori. Amanda, can you kind of give us a brief introduction about the Smokers Recovery Program?
Hello, my name is Amanda McPeck. I am a health educator at the Zanesville-Muskingum County Health Department. And recently, Michelle and I worked together to create a the Smokers Recovery Program. And what that is it's actually 5 former smokers from the community that we have that volunteer for this program. And their job is to interact with current smokers and just talk to them and kind of feel them out for where they're at in their journey to quit smoking. So one of those former smokers and volunteer is Laurie. Laurie, are you with me?
I'm here.
Hi, how are you doing tonight?
Good, how are you?
Good. So you were a former smoker. How long did you smoke for?
Almost 30 years.
It's a long time.
Yes, it is.
When, what was the turning point for you? When did you quit smoking?
Well, I had tried numerous times, and then I got a job, or was trying to get a job where I had to be a non-smoker. And so that really is what kind of tipped me over the edge to finally do it.
Yeah, and you've been smoke-free for 10 years now?
Correct.
Yeah. Is there any advice that you would recommend to someone that is vaping or smoking and isn't quite sure if they can do this?
Well, like I said, it took me numerous times. And if you try and fail, try again, because eventually it could stick.
I think that is excellent advice. And if anybody would like to talk to Laurie or any of the other former smokers that we have volunteering, they can just give us a call at the health department and we will get them connected to those individuals so they can talk about what's stressing them out and why they're smoking and any of the other things that they need. And I think that's back to you now, Michelle.
Okay, sounds good. I'm not seeing any questions unless, am I seeing this wrong, Aaron? Okay, so there's just one more slide that I wanted to show. I just kind of want to go over our local tobacco quitting resources. So we have Rambo Memorial Health Center. They have a soft tobacco program. It's free to all residents in Muskingum County. They do offer nicotine replacement therapy for anyone over the age of 18, as long as they've completed the first 3 classes. Then there's Genesis Healthcare System. They have their tobacco treatment program. They do bill insurance, so it is a good idea to, make sure you call ahead and see if there's going to be any type of out-of-pocket cost. There's also NVHC. They accept insurance, and then if you don't have insurance, it's based on income. Then for our state resources, there's the Ohio Tobacco Quit Line. They also do with vaping and traditional cigarettes. That's for anyone over the age of 18. Then My Life, My Quit is for anyone under the age of 18. Just so you know, they do not offer nicotine replacement therapy. And this program was developed by teens. So it's definitely more teen and user friendly on that aspect. And then lastly, I just want to thank all the speakers for being here tonight. Thank you for taking the time. And we do have a Vaping Tobacco Coalition. We meet usually quarterly. So if you guys are interested in joining, just email me. It's michelles@zmchd.org.